The classroom phone felt heavier than it should have. Ms. Sarah Mitchell's hand trembled as she lifted it from the receiver, her fingers already moving across the numbered buttons before her mind had fully caught up with what she was doing. 15 years of teaching kindergarten, of scraped knees and lost teeth, of parent conferences and progress reports, of hundreds of children passing through her care. In all that time, she had never made this call. Not once. Her throat tightened as the dial tone hummed in her ear, and she glanced back through the small window in her classroom door. The little girl was still there, standing beside her desk, exactly where Sarah had left her. The principal's footsteps echoed down the hallway before Sarah even heard his voice on the phone. He must have been close by. Must have heard the urgency in her tone when she'd asked him to come immediately. When he appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, his expression shifted from concern to something darker as he followed Sarah's gaze to the child. "How long?" he asked quietly. Sarah swallowed hard. 3 weeks, she whispered. 3 weeks of standing. 3 weeks of refusing to sit. And this morning I finally understood why. The little girl looked up at them with wide, fearful eyes. She gripped the edge of her desk with small fingers that had gone white at the knuckles. Her legs trembled. Sarah's heart shattered all over again. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. But to understand how we got here, to this moment of crisis in a sunny classroom on a Wednesday morning, we have to go back. Back to the first day the little girl refused to sit, back to when everything still seemed normal. Westbrook Elementary sat nestled in a quiet neighborhood where houses had front porches and dogs barked at mail carriers. The kind of place where everyone knew the crossing guard's name and parents volunteered for bake sales. The school itself was old but well-maintained, with brick walls covered in climbing ivy and windows that actually opened when the weather turned pleasant. Inside, the hallway smelled like pencil shavings and the industrial cleaner the custodian used every evening. Children's artwork decorated every available wall space, bright splashes of color and creativity that made visitors smile. Sarah Mitchell had taught in room 12 for most of her career. She'd watched the neighborhood change, seen families move in and out, taught siblings and sometimes even children of her former students. At 43, she still loved her job with the same passion she'd felt at 25, maybe more. She knew how to spot a child who needed extra attention, knew the difference between normal restlessness and something deeper, knew when to push and when to give space. Her colleagues called her the child whisperer. Parents requested her class specifically. She had a gift, they said, an instinct. That instinct had been honed over years of observation, of studying child development, of attending workshops and reading research. But more than that, it came from genuinely caring. From seeing each child as a complete person with their own story, their own struggles, their own silent languages. Sarah had learned to read those languages. The way a child held their shoulders could speak volumes. The quality of their silence could tell her things their words never would. She paid attention. She noticed. Which is why, when Emily Walker arrived in her classroom that first day of school, Sarah noticed her immediately. Not because the child was disruptive or loud, quite the opposite. Emily was 5 years old, small for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and brown eyes that seemed too serious for someone so young. She wore a pink dress that looked freshly ironed, white sneakers without a single scuff mark, and carried a backpack that was clearly new. She stood in the doorway that first morning, clutching her mother's hand, and surveyed the classroom with an expression that struck Sarah as oddly adult. Wary, calculating, afraid. Sarah had approached with her warmest smile. "Good morning. You must be Emily. I'm so happy you're in my class this year." The little girl had nodded but said nothing. Her mother, a thin woman with tired eyes and a distracted air, had barely made eye contact. "She's shy," the woman had said quickly. "She'll warm up." Then she'd extracted her hand from Emily's grip and disappeared down the hallway before Sarah could initiate the usual first day of school small talk she liked to have with parents. Red flag number 1. Parents who couldn't meet her eyes, parents who seemed eager to leave. Sarah had made a mental note but pushed it aside. Some parents were just uncomfortable in schools. Bad memories of their own childhoods, work stress, 1,000 reasons that had nothing to do with their children. She turned her attention back to Emily. "Would you like to choose where you'd like to sit? We have lots of good spots." Emily had walked carefully to a desk in the second row, not too close to the front, not hidden in the back. A spot where she could observe but not be the center of attention. Smart positioning for a shy child. The morning had gone smoothly. Sarah began with their usual welcome circle, where all the children sat on the colorful rug at the front of the room and shared their names and one thing they'd done over the summer. The other kindergartners chattered excitedly, bouncing with the excess energy of 5-year-olds who'd been told to sit still. Emily had waited her turn patiently. When called upon, she'd said simply, "My name is Emily and I went to the park." Her voice was quiet but clear. She offered no additional details. Sarah had smiled encouragingly and moved on. After circle time, the children returned to their desks for their first activity. Simple stuff. Name tags they could decorate with crayons and stickers. Sarah walked around the room, offering help and praise, getting to know her new students. She noticed Emily's careful, precise coloring. The little girl stayed inside every line, used complementary colors, created something that looked almost professional compared to the enthusiastic scribbles of her peers. "This is beautiful, Emily," Sarah had said warmly. "You're a wonderful artist." Emily had glanced up briefly, offered the tiniest hint of a smile, and returned to her work. Nothing concerning, nothing remarkable. Just a quiet, well-behaved child who seemed eager to please. Sarah had taught hundreds like her. They usually blossomed as the year went on, making friends, gaining confidence, showing their personalities. She'd expected the same from Emily, but then came the second day, and everything changed. It started during morning circle time again. Sarah had called the children to the rug, and they'd come scrambling over, pushing and giggling and claiming their favorite spots. All except Emily. Sarah noticed her standing beside her desk, watching the others. "Emily, honey, come join us on the rug," Sarah called gently. The little girl shook her head. "I'm okay here," she said softly. Sarah frowned slightly. "We all sit together during circle time. That's how we do it in this classroom. Come on. There's room right here." She patted the space next to another little girl who smiled invitingly at Emily. But Emily didn't move. She gripped the edge of her desk, and Sarah saw her whole body tense. "I want to stand," Emily said, her voice firmer now. There was something in her tone. Not defiance, exactly. Fear. Sarah's instinct prickled. She could insist, could use her teacher voice and make it a rule. But something stopped her. Instead, she smiled and said, "Okay, just for today, but tomorrow we'll try sitting together, okay?" Emily nodded quickly, relief washing across her small face. Sarah had continued with the lesson, but her attention kept drifting back to Emily. The child stood rigid beside her desk, watching intently but maintaining distance. When circle time ended and the children returned to their seats for an activity, Emily finally sat down. But Sarah noticed how carefully she lowered herself, how she gripped the chair, how she winced just slightly as she made contact with the seat. Red flag number 2. Sarah made another mental note. Maybe the child had fallen. Maybe she'd bruised her tailbone at the park she'd mentioned. Kids hurt themselves all the time. She'd ask casually later. No need to make a big deal out of it. But later that day, during snack time, Emily stood again. The other children sat at the tables, munching on goldfish crackers and apple slices, chattering about their favorite cartoons. Emily stood at the edge of her table, her snack untouched. "Emily, sweetheart, wouldn't you like to sit down and eat?" Sarah asked, approaching her quietly. The little girl shook her head. "I'm not hungry." But Sarah saw her glancing at the crackers. Saw her swallow. She was hungry. She just didn't want to sit. Sarah crouched down to Emily's level, making sure to keep her voice gentle and non-threatening. "Did you hurt yourself? Is your bottom sore from falling or something?" Emily's eyes widened with something that looked like panic. She shook her head vigorously. "I'm fine. I just like standing." Her voice trembled. Sarah studied her for a moment. The child's hands were shaking. Her breathing had quickened. This wasn't about preference. This was fear. But fear of what? Sarah decided not to push. She'd been teaching long enough to know that sometimes children needed space before they could open up. She stood and moved away, but she watched Emily carefully for the rest of the day. The pattern continued. During story time, when all the other children gathered close to hear Sarah read, Emily stood at the back of the group. During art time, she stood at her desk to color. During music time, she stood in place while the others sat cross-legged on the floor. Always standing. Always tense. Always watching. By the end of the second day, Sarah was certain something was wrong. She just didn't know what. That evening, Sarah pulled Emily's file from her cabinet. Basic information. Birth date, address, emergency contacts. Medical records showed nothing unusual. No documented disabilities. No health concerns. Both parents listed, though the emergency contact was only the mother. Father's work number was there, but marked unavailable during work hours. Sarah made a note to call the mother the next day. Just a friendly check-in. Nothing to alarm anyone, just a teacher being thorough. But when Sarah called the following morning, the phone rang endlessly before going to voicemail. She left a message, cheerful and casual. "Hi, Mrs. Walker. This is Ms. Mitchell, Emily's teacher. I just wanted to touch base about how Emily's settling in. Give me a call when you get a chance. Thanks so much." The call was never returned. Day 3 arrived and Emily's pattern of standing continued. Sarah noticed other things now that she was watching more carefully. The way Emily flinched when another child accidentally bumped into her. The way she held herself rigidly, as if bracing for impact. The way her eyes darted to the door whenever footsteps passed in the hallway. The way she never played during recess, just stood by herself near the wall while the other children ran and laughed. Sarah tried to engage her during free playtime. "Emily, would you like to play with the blocks? Or maybe the dress-up corner?" Emily shook her head. "I'm okay," she said quietly. Always the same response. "I'm okay." But she wasn't okay. Sarah could see it in every line of her small body. The other children began to notice. During the second week, a little boy named Marcus asked loudly during circle time, "Why does Emily always stand up? Is she in trouble?" The other children turned to look at Emily, who shrank back against the wall. Sarah intervened quickly. "Everyone in this classroom gets to learn in the way that feels best for them. Emily likes to stand, and that's perfectly fine. We don't make fun of people for being different, right?" The children nodded and moved on, but Sarah saw the flush of embarrassment on Emily's cheeks, the way she ducked her head, the way her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. That afternoon, Sarah approached her colleague, Jennifer, during their planning period. Jennifer had been teaching for nearly 30 years and had seen everything. "I need your thoughts on something," Sarah said, explaining Emily's behavior. Jennifer listened carefully, her experienced eyes narrowing. How long has this been going on? She asked. 2 weeks now, every single day. She refuses to sit, claims she likes standing, but I can see she's in pain. Or afraid, or both. Jennifer frowned thoughtfully. Have you noticed any other signs? Withdrawal? Aggression? Changes in appearance? Sarah nodded. She's incredibly withdrawn, doesn't play with other kids, flinches at sudden movements, and she's always wearing dresses or skirts, nothing that would put pressure on her lower body. Jennifer's expression darkened. You're thinking abuse. It wasn't a question. Sarah's stomach churned. I don't want to think it. But yes, the signs are there. I tried calling the mother, but she hasn't called back. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Document everything, she finally said. Every instance, every refusal to sit, every flinch, every behavior. If you're right, you'll need it. And if you're wrong, at least you were thorough. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. What if I'm overreacting? She asked quietly. What if she really did just hurt herself and I'm making it into something it's not? Jennifer met her eyes seriously. Better to overreact and be wrong than to ignore it and let a child suffer. You know that. Sarah did know that. She'd been trained in recognizing signs of abuse. She'd sat through workshops and seminars. She knew the statistics, 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys. It happened in every community, every neighborhood, every income level. It happened to children who seemed perfectly normal, perfectly fine, perfectly safe. It happened in houses with front porches and climbing ivy. It happened to little girls who colored inside the lines and said, please and thank you. It happened silently, behind closed doors, in homes where neighbors never suspected a thing. Sarah had known all of this intellectually, but knowing it and seeing it were 2 different things. And seeing it in her classroom, in a child she was responsible for protecting, made everything real in a way that turned her blood cold. The 3rd week began, and Emily's behavior remained unchanged. If anything, she seemed more withdrawn, more fearful. Sarah noticed bruises now, small ones on Emily's arms, faint yellowing marks that could have been from normal childhood roughhousing, but lined up in patterns that made Sarah's stomach turn. Finger-shaped, the kind that came from being grabbed, held down. Sarah documented them carefully, noting the date and location of each mark. She took photos with her phone when Emily wasn't looking, feeling sick with every click of the camera, but knowing evidence mattered. She tried again to engage Emily in conversation. During indoor recess on a rainy day, while the other children played in centers, Sarah sat at a table with coloring books and called Emily over. "Want to color with me?" she asked. Emily approached hesitantly, hovering at the edge of the table. "You can sit down, honey. Just you and me." "Nice and quiet." Emily shook her head. "I like standing," she whispered. Sarah nodded as if this were perfectly normal. "Okay, standing it is. Can I ask you something, Emily?" The little girl's body went rigid. "What?" Her voice was barely audible. "Are you happy at home?" Sarah asked gently. "Do you feel safe there?" Emily's eyes went wide. She looked at the door as if considering running, her hands clenched into fists. For a long moment, she said nothing. Sarah waited, her heart pounding. This was the moment. The child was going to tell her something. Sarah could feel it. But then Emily's expression closed off, like a shutter slamming down. "I'm fine," she said flatly. "My home is good. I feel safe." The words sounded rehearsed, coached. Sarah's heart sank. "Emily, if someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I promise you won't get in trouble. I promise I'll help you." But Emily was already backing away, shaking her head. "Nobody's hurting me. I'm fine. I just like standing. Can I go play now?" She didn't wait for an answer. She walked quickly to the other side of the room and stood by the bookshelf, her back to Sarah, her small shoulders hunched. Sarah wanted to scream with frustration. The child was protecting someone, or had been threatened into silence. Either way, Emily had been taught that telling the truth was dangerous, that admitting what was happening would make things worse. Sarah understood the psychology. Abusers were expert manipulators. They convinced their victims that speaking out would result in punishment, abandonment, or harm to people they loved. They created webs of fear and control that trapped children in silence. Breaking through that silence required time and trust, two things Sarah was running short on. Because every day Emily came to school, every day she stood rather than sat, every day she flinched and withdrew and protected whatever terrible secret she was carrying, was another day of suffering. That afternoon, Sarah made another call to Emily's mother. This time the woman answered. "Mrs. Walker, this is Sarah Mitchell, Emily's teacher. I've been trying to reach you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes?" The woman's voice was flat, defensive. "I wanted to talk to you about Emily. I've noticed some concerning behaviors at school, and I thought we should discuss them." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of behaviors?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Emily seems very reluctant to sit down. She stands through most of the day, which is unusual for a kindergartner. I'm wondering if she's hurt herself at home, or if there's something going on that I should be aware of." The silence stretched so long Sarah thought the connection had been lost. Then Mrs. Walker's voice came back, cold and clipped. "Emily's fine. She's always been particular about things. There's nothing wrong." Sarah pressed on, trying to keep her tone professional and concerned rather than accusatory. "I understand, but as her teacher, I'm worried about her. She seems frightened, and I've noticed some bruising on her arms. I just want to make sure everything's okay at home." The response was immediate and harsh. "Are you accusing me of something?" Mrs. Walker's voice had gone sharp, dangerous. "Because I don't appreciate the implication. My daughter is fine. She probably got those bruises at school. Maybe you should watch the children better instead of making phone calls." Sarah felt her face flush. "Mrs. Walker, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm simply concerned about Emily's well-being. That's my job as her teacher." But the woman had already hung up. The dial tone buzzed in Sarah's ear like an accusation. Sarah sat at her desk for a long time after that call, staring at her phone. Her hands were shaking. She'd handled that badly. She shouldn't have mentioned the bruises, shouldn't have pushed so hard. Now the mother was defensive and angry, which would make everything more difficult. But what was the alternative? Ignoring what she was seeing? Pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? Sarah knew she'd reached the point where she had to make a decision. Document and wait, hoping things would resolve themselves, or escalate to administration and possibly Child Protective Services, knowing that once she did, there was no taking it back. False accusations could destroy families, could ruin lives, could cost her her job and her reputation. But failing to report could cost Emily something far more precious: her safety, her childhood, possibly her life. That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Emily. Every flinch, every whispered, "I'm fine." Every moment of fear in those two serious brown eyes. She thought about the research she'd read, about how abuse victims often protected their abusers, about how children could be threatened into silence, about how the signs were often subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. But Sarah had been looking, had been seeing, and now she had to act. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would give it one more day. One more chance to reach Emily directly. If the child confirmed what Sarah suspected, or if the behaviors continued, she would make the formal report. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. The fourth week began on a Monday morning that felt heavy with anticipation. Sarah watched Emily enter the classroom, moving with that same careful precision. The little girl went directly to her desk and stood beside it, waiting for the day to begin. During morning announcements, Sarah noticed Emily's eyes kept drifting to the door. She seemed more nervous than usual, more on edge. When it was time for circle time, Sarah tried a different approach. Instead of calling all the children to the rug, she had them stay at their desks. "Today we're going to do something different," she announced. "I want everyone to tell me one thing that makes them feel happy and safe." The children responded enthusiastically. "My dog. My mom's hugs. My blanket. Playing outside." When it was Emily's turn, she was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly Sarah almost missed it, she whispered, "School." Just that one word. School. Sarah's heart clenched. School made Emily feel safe, which meant home didn't. The confirmation Sarah had been both hoping for and dreading. After the activity during free playtime, Sarah approached Emily again. "Can we talk for a minute? Just you and me?" she asked gently. Emily looked up at her with those dark, fearful eyes and nodded. Sarah led her to a quiet corner of the classroom, away from the other children. She knelt down so she was at Emily's level. "Emily, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that?" The little girl nodded, but her whole body was trembling. "Does someone at home hurt you?" Sarah asked quietly. "Do they hit you or touch you in ways that make you uncomfortable?" Emily's face went pale. Her breathing quickened. She looked at the door again, as if calculating whether she could run. "I'm not supposed to tell," she whispered. "They said I'm not supposed to tell anyone. They said bad things would happen if I told." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. She needed to be strong, calm, safe. "Emily, listen to me very carefully. You are not in trouble. Nothing bad is going to happen to you, but I need you to tell me the truth so I can help you. Is someone at home hurting you?" A single tear rolled down Emily's cheek. She nodded. Once. Barely a movement. But it was enough. "Who?" Sarah asked, though she was almost certain she knew the answer. "My dad," Emily whispered. "He gets angry. He says I'm bad. He says I deserve it." Another tear. Then another. "Does your mom know?" Emily nodded again. "She tells me to be quiet, to not make him more angry. She says if I tell anyone, they'll take me away and I'll never see her again." Sarah's vision blurred with rage and heartbreak. She wanted to pull this child into her arms and promise everything would be okay. But she couldn't make that promise. She didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if the system would protect Emily or fail her. Didn't know if reporting would make things better or worse. But she knew she had to try. "Emily, I need to look at where you're hurt. Can you show me?" The little girl hesitated for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, she lifted the back of her dress slightly. Sarah bit her lip to keep from gasping. The bruises were extensive, dark purple and yellow marks across the child's lower back and buttocks. Some were fresh, some were healing, a clear pattern of repeated abuse. Sarah gently lowered the dress. "Thank you for being brave enough to show me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing telling me." Emily looked up at her with eyes full of fear and something that looked like hope. "Are you going to tell?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes, honey, I have to, because what's happening to you is not okay. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be protected. And I'm going to make sure that happens." Emily started crying in earnest then, her small body shaking with sobs. Sarah held her carefully, mindfully of her injuries, and let her cry. The other children had noticed something was wrong, but Sarah signaled to her aide to keep them occupied. This moment was for Emily. This moment was the beginning of everything changing. "Am I going to get in trouble?" Emily asked through her tears. No, Sarah said firmly. You are not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? None of it. But Emily shook her head. My dad says I'm bad, that I make him angry, that if I was better, he wouldn't have to punish me. Sarah felt her heart shatter. This was the cruelest part of abuse, the way it convinced victims they deserved it. The way it twisted their understanding of love and safety until they believed pain was normal. Emily, look at me. Sarah waited until the little girl met her eyes. Your dad is wrong. You are not bad. You do not deserve to be hurt. What he's doing is wrong, not you. Him. Do you understand? Emily stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to process this revolutionary idea, that she wasn't the problem, that she deserved better. Really, she whispered. Really, Sarah confirmed. I promise you. Emily buried her face in Sarah's shoulder and cried like her heart was breaking. Maybe it was. But maybe it was also the beginning of healing. Sarah held Emily until the sobs subsided. Then she spoke quietly. I need to go make a phone call now. You're going to stay here with Ms. Jessica, okay? You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked to her desk. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and preparing for. She dialed the principal's extension first. Protocol required she inform administration before making any formal reports. Mr. Peterson, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need you to come to my classroom immediately. It's urgent. She didn't wait for his response. She hung up and dialed the child abuse hotline number she'd memorized years ago, but never thought she'd actually use. When Mr. Peterson arrived minutes later, slightly out of breath, Sarah met him at the door. She explained everything in a low, urgent voice. The weeks of standing, the flinching, the bruises, the conversation she'd just had with Emily, the confirmation of abuse. Mr. Peterson's face went gray. He'd been a principal for 20 years, but this was every educator's nightmare. You're certain? He asked. Sarah nodded. I saw the injuries. She confirmed everything. We need to call CPS immediately. Mr. Peterson looked through the door at Emily, who was standing by the window now, staring out at the playground. I'll call from my office. You stay with her. Don't let her out of your sight. Sarah nodded. She watched him hurry down the hallway, then returned to her classroom. The other children were playing quietly, sensing something serious was happening. Sarah's aide, Jessica, caught her eye with a questioning look. Sarah shook her head slightly. Not now. She'd explain later. The next hour passed in a surreal blur. Sarah kept the children occupied with quiet activities while they waited. Emily returned to standing by her desk, but now there was something different in her posture, a slight easing of the tension, as if telling the secret had released some of the weight she'd been carrying. Sarah stayed close, offering reassuring smiles whenever Emily looked her way. Around 10 o'clock, Mr. Peterson returned with two women Sarah didn't recognize. One was in her 40s, wearing a professional pantsuit and carrying a briefcase. The other was younger, in scrubs. The social worker and medical examiner. Sarah's stomach clenched. This was really happening. Miss Mitchell, the older woman said quietly. I'm Detective Linda Morrison with Child Protective Services. This is Dr. Amy Chen. We need to speak with Emily Walker. Sarah nodded and gestured toward Emily. The little girl had gone pale again, seeing the strangers in the classroom. Sarah crossed to her quickly. Emily, these people are here to help you. They're going to ask you some questions and make sure you're okay. I'm going to be right here the whole time, okay? Emily grabbed Sarah's hand, her small fingers digging in with desperate strength. Don't leave, she pleaded. I won't, Sarah promised. I'm right here. The social worker approached with practiced gentleness. Hi, Emily. My name is Linda. I know you talked to Ms. Mitchell this morning about some things happening at home. Can you tell me about that?" Emily's eyes darted between the adults. She was shutting down. Sarah could see it happening, the walls going back up, the fear returning. "It's okay," Sarah encouraged softly. "You can tell them, just like you told me." But Emily shook her head violently. "I don't want to. I want to go home." The words were automatic, reflexive. Even knowing what waited for her there, Emily defaulted to the familiar, the devil she knew. Sarah felt tears threaten again, but blinked them away. "Emily, honey, remember what we talked about how you deserve to be safe. These people can help make sure you're safe." Detective Morrison knelt down to Emily's level, her voice gentle but professional. "Emily, I know you're scared, but I need you to be brave just a little bit longer. Can you tell me who hurt you?" Emily looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Then, in a voice so small it was barely audible, Emily said, "My dad." Detective Morrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw her jaw tighten. "And where did he hurt you?" she asked carefully. Emily's hands went to the hem of her dress. "On my bottom, and my back, and sometimes my arms when he grabs me." The detective made notes on a tablet. "How many times has this happened?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know. Lots of times, whenever I'm bad." "When was the last time?" Emily thought for a moment. 2 days ago. He was mad because I spilled my milk at dinner." Dr. Chen stepped forward now. "Emily, I'm a doctor. I need to take a look at where you're hurt to make sure you're healing okay. Is that all right?" Emily shrank back against Sarah. "Will it hurt?" she asked fearfully. "No, sweetie," Dr. Chen assured her. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just need to see and maybe take some pictures. Miss Mitchell can stay with you if that makes you feel better." Emily looked up at Sarah, her eyes pleading. "Please don't leave." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I won't. I promise." They moved to a private space in the nurse's office. Sarah held Emily's hand while Dr. Chen conducted a gentle examination. Sarah turned away when Emily lifted her dress, giving the child privacy, but she heard Dr. Chen's sharp intake of breath. The injuries must be worse than Sarah had seen in the classroom. Dr. Chen took photographs and made detailed notes. When she was finished, she helped Emily lower her dress and gave her a sticker for being brave. "You did great," she told the little girl warmly. Then she turned to Detective Morrison with an expression that said everything. This was serious. This was bad. This was going to result in immediate action. Back in the classroom, while the other children had been moved to the library for story time, Detective Morrison explained what would happen next. "Emily, you're not going home today. We're going to take you somewhere safe where nobody can hurt you." Emily's eyes went wide with panic. "What about my mom?" she asked. "I want my mom." Sarah felt her heart break all over again. Even after everything, the child still wanted her mother, still loved the parent who had failed to protect her. Detective Morrison's voice remained calm and professional. "Your mom is going to be contacted, but right now our priority is making sure you're safe. Do you understand?" Emily started crying again, but she'll be mad. She said bad things would happen if I told. She said they'd take me away. "You're not being taken away as a punishment," Detective Morrison explained patiently. "You're being protected. There's a big difference." But Emily didn't understand the difference. All she knew was that her world was exploding, that the secret she'd been threatened into keeping was out, that everything was changing in ways she couldn't control. Sarah pulled her close, letting her cry against her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure if that was true. She wanted it to be true, needed it to be true. But she'd been teaching long enough to know that the system didn't always protect the children it was meant to serve. Within the hour, Emily was placed in emergency foster care. Sarah watched from her classroom window as Detective Morrison led the little girl to a waiting car. Emily looked back once, her tear-stained face visible through the glass. Sarah waved, trying to smile reassuringly. Then the car pulled away, and Emily was gone. Sarah stood at the window for a long time after that, tears finally falling freely. Jessica, her aide, came to stand beside her. "Did you do the right thing?" she asked quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a question. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I did the only thing I could do." Jessica nodded. "That's all any of us can do." But it didn't feel like enough. Not even close. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Sarah went through the motions of teaching, but her mind was elsewhere, with Emily, wondering where she was, if she was scared, if she understood why this was happening, if she hated Sarah for making that call. The other children asked questions. Where was Emily? Was she sick? When would she be back? Sarah deflected as best she could. "Emily had to go home early today. Let's focus on our math lesson, okay?" But the empty space at Emily's desk seemed to scream at her. An accusation and a reminder all at once. That afternoon, after the children had been picked up by their parents, Mr. Peterson called Sarah to his office. "I wanted to check on you," he said once she was seated. "That was a tough morning." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "You did the right thing," he continued. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you potentially saved that child's life." Sarah finally found her words. "Did I? Or did I just make everything worse?" She was terrified. She begged for her mother. "What if foster care is worse than what she was dealing with at home? What if I just traumatized her more?" Mr. Peterson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, you've been teaching long enough to know the statistics. Abuse escalates. What starts as bruises can become broken bones, can become death. You saw clear evidence of repeated physical abuse. You did everything by the book. You documented. You tried to contact the parents. You gave the child multiple opportunities to disclose. And when she finally did, you acted. That's not just the right thing. That's the only thing." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to feel confident in her decision, but doubt gnawed at her. "What happens now?" she asked. Mr. Peterson sighed. "CPS will investigate. They'll interview the parents, examine the home, determine whether Emily can safely return or if she needs to remain in foster care. If charges are filed, there will be a criminal investigation as well. It's going to be a long process." That night, Sarah sat in her empty apartment and cried. She thought about Emily standing in her classroom, day after day, carrying a secret that was too heavy for someone so small. She thought about the mother who had chosen her husband over her daughter's safety. She thought about the father who had convinced a 5-year-old child that she deserved to be beaten. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. Almost. Because Sarah knew it happened every day. In houses that looked normal from the outside, in families that seemed fine to neighbors and friends. Behind closed doors, children suffered in silence. And sometimes, if they were lucky, someone noticed. Someone cared enough to look closer. Someone was brave enough to make the call. The following week was surreal. Emily's desk remained empty. The other children stopped asking about her after a few days, moving on with the short attention spans of 5-year-olds. But Sarah couldn't move on. She thought about Emily constantly, wondered if she was adjusting to her foster home, if she had nightmares, if she blamed Sarah for everything that had happened. Sarah wanted to call and check on her, but she'd been told that wasn't appropriate during the investigation. She had to wait. Had to trust that the system was working, had to believe that Emily was better off than she had been. The uncertainty was agonizing. 2 weeks after Emily had been removed from her home, Detective Morrison returned to the school. She asked to speak with Sarah privately. They sat in an empty classroom and Sarah braced herself for news she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "I wanted to update you on Emily's case," Morrison began. "First, I want you to know that the medical evidence you helped us obtain was crucial. The photographs Dr. Chen took documented extensive bruising consistent with repeated abuse, multiple incidents over an extended period of time." Sarah felt sick. "How bad was it?" she asked quietly. Morrison met her eyes. "Worse than what you saw in the classroom. There were older scars, evidence of previous injuries that had healed. This had been going on for months, maybe longer." Sarah closed her eyes. Months. Emily had been suffering for months while going about her daily life, coming to school, doing her work, trying to be invisible. "What about the parents?" she asked. Morrison's expression hardened. "The father has been arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse. The mother is being charged as well for failure to protect. The investigation revealed that she was aware of the abuse and did nothing to stop it." Sarah nodded slowly, processing this. Part of her felt vindicated. She had been right. Emily had been in danger. The decision to report had been justified, but another part of her felt only sadness. A family destroyed, a child traumatized, a future forever altered. "And Emily?" she asked. "How is she?" Morrison's face softened slightly. "She's adjusting. It's been difficult. She's had nightmares and behavioral issues. But her foster family is experienced and patient. She's in therapy. She's starting to understand that what happened to her wasn't her fault." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. "Does she hate me?" she asked. "For telling?" Morrison shook her head. "Actually, she talks about you often, about how you were kind to her, how you made her feel safe. She drew you a picture." Morrison pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and handed it to Sarah. Sarah unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a child's drawing, done in bright crayons. 2 stick figures stood in what was clearly a classroom. One tall, one small, holding hands. Hearts floated above their heads. At the top, in uneven letters, Emily had written, "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for saving me." Sarah couldn't hold back the tears this time. They streamed down her face as she stared at the simple drawing. "Can I see her?" she asked through her tears. "Can I let her know I'm thinking about her?" Morrison hesitated. "Not yet. The case is still ongoing and we want to minimize disruptions while she adjusts to her new living situation. But maybe in a few months, once things have settled. I'll pass along your message, though. I'll let her know you asked about her and that you care." Sarah nodded, clutching the drawing. "Please tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her she was so brave. Tell her I think about her every day and I hope she's happy." Morrison smiled. "I will." She stood to leave, then paused. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of teachers who notice signs and do nothing, who convince themselves it's not their problem or they're overreacting. What you did took courage. You might have saved that little girl's life. I hope you know that." After Morrison left, Sarah sat alone with Emily's drawing for a long time. She thought about the weight of responsibility teachers carried, the power they had to change lives or miss crucial signs, the trust placed in them by children who had nowhere else to turn. She thought about Emily standing day after day, silently screaming for help in the only way she knew how. And she thought about what would have happened if she'd ignored her instincts, if she'd convinced herself it was nothing, if she'd been too afraid to make the call. The weeks turned into months. Emily's desk was eventually filled by a new student who transferred in mid-year. The classroom returned to normal rhythms, but Sarah was changed by the experience. She looked at her students differently now, paid closer attention to the small signs that might indicate trouble at home. She'd always been observant, but now she was hypervigilant. Every bruise, every behavior change, every sign of fear or withdrawal. She documented everything. She erred on the side of caution, because she'd learned the cost of silence, the danger of assuming everything was fine. 3 months after Emily had been removed from her home, Sarah received a letter. It was forwarded through CPS, the return address redacted for privacy, but inside was a note in careful, childlike handwriting. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, thank you for helping me. I am safe now. I have a new family and they are nice. I still remember you and I miss you. Love, Emily." Attached to the note was another drawing. This one showed Emily standing in what looked like a park, smiling, surrounded by flowers and sunshine. Sarah put the letter in a special folder in her desk drawer. She reread it whenever she doubted herself, whenever she wondered if she'd done the right thing. The letter was proof that sometimes making the hard call was the only call, that children were worth fighting for, that standing up for what was right, even when it was terrifying, even when the outcome was uncertain, was what being a teacher truly meant. She never forgot Emily, the little girl who had stood when others sat, who had communicated her pain in the only way she felt safe doing, who had trusted Sarah enough to finally tell the truth. Emily became the reason Sarah continued teaching, the reminder of why her job mattered, why vigilance mattered, why caring enough to look closer could mean the difference between life and death. 5 months after Emily left her classroom, Sarah received a call from Detective Morrison. "I thought you'd want to know," Morrison said. "The father was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The mother received supervised probation and is required to complete parenting classes and therapy. She's lost custody permanently." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger. "And Emily?" she asked. Morrison's voice warmed. "She's been officially adopted by her foster family. They're wonderful people. Emily is thriving. She's happy. She's safe. And she's sitting down again." Sarah laughed through tears. "She's sitting down?" "Every day," Morrison confirmed. "Just like any other kid. The foster mom says sometimes Emily still has nightmares, still has moments of fear, but she's getting better. She's healing. And she owes that to you." After the call, Sarah walked to her classroom window and looked out at the playground. Children were at recess, running and laughing and playing. So many of them. So many individual stories, so many hidden struggles. She couldn't save them all, couldn't fix every problem or protect them from every harm, but she could pay attention, could notice, could act when necessary, could be the safe adult some children desperately needed. That was enough. It had to be enough. The final bell rang and Sarah returned to her desk. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. She thought about Emily somewhere out there, sitting in a classroom, finally able to be just a child, finally able to feel safe, finally able to heal. And Sarah smiled, because in the end, she had done what she set out to do every single day she entered her classroom. She had protected a child. She had been the voice for someone who couldn't speak. She had trusted her instincts and acted with courage even when it would have been easier to look away. That was the power teachers held, not just to educate minds, but to save lives. To be the difference between suffering and safety. To stand up when it mattered most. Emily's story was a reminder that silence allowed abuse to continue, that small signs could indicate enormous suffering, that children communicated in ways that required adults to pay attention, that one person noticing, one person caring, one person being brave enough to make a difficult call could change everything. Sarah would carry that lesson with her for the rest of her career, would share Emily's story, carefully and respectfully with other educators, would encourage them to trust their instincts and never be afraid to advocate for children who couldn't advocate for themselves. As the school year continued, Sarah often thought about that moment when she'd picked up the phone with shaking hands. The fear and uncertainty, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her decision would alter a child's life forever. She'd made the call anyway, and Emily was safe because of it. That was what mattered. That was everything. If you found this story moving and important, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with teachers, parents, and anyone who works with children. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or your own experiences. These stories need to be told. These lessons need to be learned. Because somewhere right now another child is standing when they should be sitting. Another child is silently asking for help. Another teacher is noticing signs and wondering if they should act. Let this story be the encouragement they need. Let it be the reminder that vigilance matters, that caring matters, that being brave enough to make the hard call matters. Thank you for watching. And remember, if you ever suspect a child is being abused, make the call. You could save a life.